In this session, we're going to talk about discipline. What do you do when a child will not obey or does not obey? How do you discipline them? What's the process? What's the procedure? And so we're going to go through a procedure that works and that works well. Now, first, let's start with a big misconception. A while back, I was at a children's ministry conference, and during one of the breakout sessions, a bunch of children's ministers were in the room, and we were talking about discipline. And now, I was not leading this session, but one of the other children's ministers spoke up, and she made the statement. She said, at our church, we do not discipline children. She said, if they break the rules, we don't get on to them, we don't discipline them, because we're afraid that they'll come to church, they'll get in trouble, they'll go home, and they won't want Jesus because their only experience with church was that they came, they broke the rules, and they got in trouble. And I couldn't help myself. I had to speak up. And I simply spoke up and said that I completely disagreed with what they were saying concerning discipline. Because those kids, not only were they not going to get what they needed at church, but they were also not going to truly understand the love of God. Discipline is not a problem. Discipline is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to engage kids one-on-one with what's going on in their lives. Kids need to understand there are rules, that if they cannot keep the rules, that they will not be allowed to participate. But at the same time, how you enforce the rules has to be consistent, it has to be fair, and it has to be done in love. In other words, as a leader, you should never, ever raise your voice to a child. There's no reason for it. You're the authority. You're in charge. What you say is going to go. There's no reason for you to raise your voice ever, or to get red in the face, or to get frustrated. I tell my teachers, if they ever find themselves in a situation where they are red in the face, they're feeling frustrated, they feel like pulling their hair out, or quitting their volunteer position because they just can't handle this anymore, the reason they feel that way is because they have not followed our discipline process. Now, our discipline process is very simple, and before I tell you what it is, I want to explain to you how I first began understanding how to use this process. It began when I was a pastor, and I was young. At the time, I was 18 or 19 years old, and I was pastor of a small church, and we sat in Oklahoma City across from a creek that was one of the city drainage creeks, and across the creek there was a family, and they had a couple of sons, and one of their sons was named Mikey. And during vacation Bible school, Mikey and his brother, they came to church, and it was the first time they had ever been in church. And so I remember sitting there and talking to them, giving them a high five, building a relationship with them. And then I remember we went to eat cookies and Kool-Aid, and we're sitting there eating our cookies, and we're talking, and then suddenly Mikey turns to his brother and just begins to hit him continuously in the face, just to punch his brother. And so immediately I stuck out my hand between his fist and his brother's face, stuck out my hand and asked, what are you doing? Because I was a little bit in shock. What are you doing? And Mikey turned, and he got big eyes, and he had no idea what I was going to do, and so he bolted. He took off running. He ran out of our fellowship hall. He turned down the hallway that went through our education building. Now, Mikey was short. Mikey was a little bit chubby. Mikey, he was moving fast, and let me tell you, teachers and kids, they were getting out of his way. He was like a little freight train moving through our education area. And so, as the pastor, I did what any dignified, civilized pastor would do, and I chased him. And so I'm running through our education building, trying to look as pastoral as I possibly could, as I'm going, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, pardon me, coming through. And so finally, because I know that Mikey, he's running, and I don't know why he's running, and I don't know why he's even hitting his brother, but I do know that if he gets to our worship center, that he will immediately be able to get outside, and at that point, he's probably going to be on his way home. And I wanted to catch him before that happened, and so I finally caught him right where our education hall met our worship center, and the door there opened inward. And I knew if I caught him there, that I'd be able to have a conversation. And so I got there right as he was pulling the door open. I stuck out my hand on the door, and immediately I dropped to my knees. You see, it's intimidating enough that adults are so much taller than children. When you talk to kids, especially in a serious conversation or especially a discipline issue, you really need to get on their level. You need to look at them eye to eye. And so I got eye to eye with Mikey, and I looked at him, and I said, Mikey, I said, what's going on? Why are you hitting your brother? And I made my voice as calm and quiet as I could. Mikey, why are you hitting your brother? And immediately he was in a rage. I mean, he was red in the face, and he just said, was talking about how his brother treats him. And then he said it was because his brother had taken his cookie and had dropped it into his Kool-Aid. That's why he was hitting his brother. And so I told Mikey, I said, Mikey, I'm not going to let him treat you wrong. But if someone else treats you wrong, there's a right way to handle it. You need to come to a teacher. You can't just start hitting your brother, even though he's your brother. You can't just start hitting him. I said, Mikey, we have rules here. And one of our rules is that you cannot hit other people. And he pretty much just told me that he wasn't going to do that. And so I told him, I said, Mikey, I'm going to give you a choice. And your choice is simply this. I said, Mikey, I met you today. I really like you. But you're going to have, if you're going to be in class, you have got to follow our rules. So here's the choice. Either you can follow the rules and you can go back to your class. Or if you're telling me that you will not follow our rules, then I will walk you home. And he said, I'm going home. And it broke my heart. And my first thought was, I blew it. I failed. He's going home. He's never going to come back again. And so I walked Mikey, and walking home, I told him, I said, Mikey, now tomorrow, if you can keep the rules, we want you to come back because we're going to have a lot of fun. And I want you to be there. I like you. We want you to be there. But if you're going to be in our class, you've got to follow our rules. So we walked up. When we got home, his mom asked what had happened, and I simply explained to her what had happened, that we weren't sending him home, that he had made the choice to come home, and that I wanted to walk him home just to make sure he got there safely, and that she knew what was going on. And she was very kind about all of it. And I turned to Mikey one more time, got down on his level, knelt down, gave him a high five, and just told him again, Mikey, would love to have you come back tomorrow. And went back. Now, the next morning came. And before most of the kids are there, I look up, and guess who is coming through the doors? It's Mikey. Mikey, he's back. And so he came up to me. I gave him a high five. I didn't say anything else to him. The fact that he was back, I didn't need to rehash the past with him. Now, there are times where you do need to do that. But in this situation, I didn't need to do that. Mikey was back. Mikey knew him coming back. That meant he was going to keep the rules. Now, there are other situations where a student will break the rules. You'll have the conversation with them. And then you need to look for them the next time they come to church to simply say, hey, last time we had some issues, and I know how good you can be, and I know we worked them out last time, but I'm just reminding you, this is what I expect tonight. And so, anyway, Mikey came through, gave him a high five, told him how glad I was he was there. So not long after our opening rally, they were in their classes. One of the teachers came to me, and she said, Mikey has gone crazy. Mikey has gone wild. He's out of control. You've got to come fast. And so as fast as I could, I went to the classroom. And sure enough, when I got there, there was the teachers. There were the teachers. There was the class, all standing in the hall. And Mikey was the only one left in the room. He had literally cleared that room. He had lost his temper, and he had gone into a rage. And they had moved out of the room because his rage was so intense. And so I stepped into the room, and there's Mikey standing there. There's a couple of overturned chairs. And Mikey, he's red in the face. I mean, he's in a fit. And so I knelt down again. I softened my voice. I looked him right in the eyes. And I said, Mikey, I said, can you tell me what's going on? And Mikey said this. He said, I hate everybody. He said, I hate my brother. I hate my parents. And then he paused and he looked at me. And he said, I hate everybody but you. Now, in that moment, I didn't fully understand why that was. But now, having been in children's ministry for a number of years, I understand so much better. Mikey was getting what he needed through that relationship with me that he was not getting from home. He was getting consistency because we laid down a line and we didn't budget. We didn't lay a line and then count to 3. We didn't lay down a line and then, push it back a little bit when he pushed the lines. We laid down a line. We were consistent. But not only were we consistent, we did it in love. I looked at Mikey and I told him, Mikey, I love you. I want you to be here. But there are rules that you have to keep. Mikey knew that we cared about him, not only from our words, but he knew from our actions. You see, kids, by nature, they have a need, even your most rebellious kids, they have a need for structure and for rules, because there's a certain security that rules give. For example, if I won't let this girl hurt or be mean to this other girl, there's a security. If I won't let her do it to the one girl, I'm not going to let that one girl do it back to her. And so there's a safety behind those lines where kids know these are the rules, this is what's expected, when you're up front with your expectations, so they can know what they can and cannot do. There's a safety, especially when you don't push those lines. That's why it's important that if you say it, you've got to mean it. Don't ever make an empty threat. For example, if you're at camp and say a student is misbehaving, don't ever look at them and without thoroughly thinking through, look at them and say, hey, if you do that one more time, you're going home. Because if you say it, the moment that comes out of your mouth, you have to live up to it. Otherwise, you're disciplined. They will never know what's going to be true and what's not going to be true. In fact, it casts a shadow on everything else that you say. Because if you look at them and say, hey, you did that one more time, and I'm going to take you out over to the children's office, or I'm going to talk to your parents, and then you don't follow through, well, then what happens when you get up and say, hey, God loves you, or God's going to take care of you? You know, you weren't true with one thing that you said, so now why should they believe that you're true with these other things that you're telling them? Do you see how it's important that you never let your words be anything other than exactly what you mean them to be? So if you're at an event and you look at a student and you say, if you do that one more time, you will go home, then if they do it one more time, they need to go home. Now, I've had people ask me about our discipline process. If it bothers me if a student will miss class. And let me walk you through a process, and then I'm going to answer that question. Here's our process. At our church, if a student misbehaves, and there is a difference between immaturity and defiance, and it's something that we work with our leaders on being able to understand. Somebody who's doing something out of immaturity, you come alongside them, you correct them. Now, yes, there is a time for you, if they've been told and they understand, that there's a time where that becomes more than immaturity, where it becomes defiance, where they know the rules, but now they're crossing the rules simply to challenge authority because of rebellion or because of other reasons. And so let's say a child disobeys, or let's just take, for instance, maybe it starts with immaturity. Let's say he's in the class and there's some blinds on the window, and he grabs the little dangly thing and he starts jingling it, and the teacher says, hey, Jimmy, you need to stop that. And he doesn't stop it. Well, now he's gone from immaturity, he was distracting. He didn't mean to, though. He was just playing around. He's just being a kid. And then, now he knows, but he's still doing it. And so he continues to do it. What we teach our teachers is when they tell somebody, don't do this or do this, and that child does not obey, that they give them one warning. That's all our students get, one warning. So they look at the student and they say, and a lot of times this is best if it happens away from the eyes of their peers. So say you pull a student aside one-on-one, you say, hey, Jimmy, I told you to stop playing around with that. That's a distraction to the class. Now, this is your warning. This is the only warning you're going to get. Now, Jimmy, I love you, and I want you to be in my class, because that's where we're going to have fun. That's where we're going to learn. That's where you need to be. But if you break the rules again, then I'm going to take you at our church, it's the children's office, and they come and they talk to me or they talk to my wife. And so they would say, you're either going to go talk to Colby or you're going to talk to Mary Beth about what's going on. Now, let's say that student goes back in their class. They've had their warning now. And so maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes passes by, and then suddenly that student, there they are, and they're doing the exact same thing again. Well, there's defiance. They know what's expected. They're pushing the lines. And anytime a student goes this far, there's a reason that they're going that far. There's something deeper than the situation that's going on to create or cause this rebellion, either against that teacher's authority or simply because in their character, this is the type person they're growing up to be. And so at that point, our leaders would bring them, Jimmy, I told you not to do that again. You've crossed the line. Now you need to come with me. I'm going to take you to Colby or Mary Beth. And then they would bring that student to one of us. And this is the conversation we would have with them. Jimmy, we want you to be in class. Jimmy, that's where you're going to learn. It's really the same one the teachers had. We want you to be in class, but to be in that class, you earn that privilege by following the rules. And if you can't follow the rules, we're not going to send you back in there. Now, if you look at me and you say, I will follow the rules. I will do everything my teacher says, and I will not distract or disrupt anymore. Now, it's important that when you're talking to a student, you be very specific about exactly what they're doing that has caused this issue, because they may not know. You need to be very clear. This is what you're doing, and this is why you shouldn't be doing it. Let them know the reason why. And so they come to us, Jimmy, I want you to be in class. I love you. That's where you're going to have fun. So I'm going to give you a choice. Either you can go back into class and you can totally obey your teachers and not disrupt anymore. Now, if I let you go back in and you disrupt and you disobey again on anything, I mean, the first time you cross the line, you're going to be right back here and you're going to wait in this children's office till your parents come, and then I'm going to have a conversation with them about what happened today. And if you look at me right now and you say, hey, Colby, I am not going to obey my parents or my teachers, when I'm not going to go back in there and I'm not going to obey, then there's no reason for me to send you back in. We're just going to keep you right here in this children's office, and you won't get to participate in anything. You will simply sit here and you will wait until your parents come. And so those are your two options. Go back in, obey your teachers, give them the respect they deserve, or wait here and we'll discuss this with your parents when they arrive. Now, most of the children will decide to go back into class. Now, when we take them back to class, we have a conversation with our teachers that goes something like this. Even though our teachers know this, we'll pull one of them aside and simply say, hey, Jimmy's back in class. This is what happened. We had our conversation with him. If he does anything else that's wrong this entire time, whether it's anything else that disrupts, then we want you to immediately bring him back to us, and he'll stay with us the rest of the class time. And we explain to our teachers, that is not a bad thing. Now we're back to the question that I ask you. I've had teachers ask me, do you ever feel bad when a student is not willing to obey and they miss their Bible story, their whole Sunday school lesson, because they're sitting in the children's office because they could not obey? And my answer to that is, I don't feel bad about it at all, because they are learning a life lesson. And the life lesson that they're learning is simply there are consequences for poor behavior. And when you do wrong things, there's consequences that you pay for. And if I can help them learn that lesson as an 8-year-old, then so much better for them that they don't learn it when they're 16 or 18 or 25. There are many kids that they haven't learned these lessons. And your ministry becomes an opportunity. This is a ministry opportunity. And so when their parents show up, I talk to the parents first away from the student to explain to them what happened. So I'd call the mom and dad over and I'd say, this is what happened this morning. I'd walk them through all the details for what the teachers did, through what I said, and simply let them know that they crossed the line again, or they said they wouldn't obey, and so that they had stayed in the children's office. And then I let the parents know, we want them here, we want them in class, but being in class is a privilege they earn by following the rules. Now, I have had parents look at me and basically tell me their child can do no wrong. And I've had parents look at me and basically tell me that the idea every child should be allowed in class and the idea they earn that privilege by following the rules is ridiculous. And they are very welcome to their opinion, but their opinion doesn't change our ministry, our rules, or our process. We have these processes in place for a reason. Now, most parents are very agreeable, and most parents immediately, they will begin to share with you other situations in their son or daughter's life, whether at home or at school, where these same kind of situations are happening. In fact, we've had a number of parents that will break down and begin to cry because this just keeps happening over and over and over. Do you see the opportunity? This is not a problem. This is an opportunity for us to step into this family's life, to come alongside them, to give them advice, to help them, to know how to pray for their student, to reach out to those moms and dads. Now, not all parents are willing to let you do this, but those that are, there's an incredible impact that you and your ministry and your volunteers can have in their lives and the life of that student and the life of that family, because you are not treating this discipline issue as a problem. That child is not a problem. That child is a creation of God, loved by God. God has great plans for them. But that child is at a crisis point where he's making poor choices. And we can help come alongside to help him make good choices. Now, you'd be surprised. The children that we go through this process with, you would think they would be the ones who would show up at church and they would be standoffish from us. Or not very attached to us. They actually become the ones that are the first to come in and to greet you, to look for you, to give you a hug. They have a special attachment to you in a different way than even the other children in your ministry. And it's because you have walked through this valley with them. And they see, even though I did something wrong, they still love me. They still want me here. Now, I teach our teachers that if there ever comes a time where a student walks in their class and in their heart they go, oh, no, great, so-and-so's here today. I teach our teachers if they ever find themselves falling into that attitude, that immediately they need to begin to pray for that child every day. That they need to immediately begin to reach out to that child. Look for that child when they first come. Greet that child before that child even sees them. Find them. Greet them. Go out of their way to call them in the week, to call their parents, because something is growing up in that leader's heart that doesn't need to be there. And how it will be rooted out is through prayer, through relationship, and through understanding that child, that family, and what God wants to do in that child's life. All of those are tied together into one very important package. And so as a leader, discipline. Now, if you're a volunteer listening to this, you need to follow the policies that your children's ministry has in place. You need to follow their guidelines. And if you don't like their guidelines, or you see issues like the one church that just said, we don't discipline, then let them listen to this or give them advice on what you're hearing today about how to have a process, a very specific, actually written process is what we have. That way, if parents want to see how do you discipline, we can actually hand it to them on paper and say, this is what we do, this is why we do it. It's important that exists. Then also, I want to encourage you, when you're at events, camps, Bible schools, events, let there be one person who does the discipline. As a leader, when I was first in ministry, I would let sponsors, if somebody was doing something wrong, our sponsors, they would correct it, and then not only would they correct it, we had empowered them to assign the discipline, whether it was kitchen patrol or cleaning a toilet when we left camp. And boy, after a year or two of that, I walked away from that and said I would never do that again, because I would have two kids who did exactly the same thing, and one would get almost no consequence, and one would get this huge consequence, just depending on what sponsor they had. So to be fair and consistent across the board, you need one ultimate person that all of your discipline, even on Sunday morning, that all of the discipline is going to go through. That way you never hit the conflict that these two students did exactly the same thing, but they had completely different consequences. And also, that way, if it all goes through one person, then you always have one person who understands what's going on. And typically, this is going to be the children's minister, because you need to be highly involved in these students' lives to help them so that they learn these life lessons about discipline and consequences at a young age. Now, if you're teaching a class, in your classroom, of course, you can have rules. Be very upfront about your rules. Let your kids know what they can and can't do. In fact, sometimes in a small group, even let your kids help set the rules. And then once they're set, stick with the rules. Now, I want to review a few things. To be guarded and to be correct in discipline, you want to talk to a student on their level. Get eye to eye. Be very specific what they did wrong. Tell them that you love them. Make sure that they understand that you want them to be in their class, but that they have to keep the rules. Remember, conversations like this are best away from the eyes of the peers. Don't do this in front of the whole class. And it's also very important that you take care of discipline issues when they arise. Don't let a child get into a pattern of condoned or ignored misbehavior. If so, it's going to take a longer time to help them understand where the line is drawn for unacceptable behavior. Be clear, be consistent from the very beginning. Then finally, remember, don't make empty threats. Make sure that if you say it, you mean it. One of the kindergarten teacher I used to work with, she would say, if I say it, I mean it. If I mean it, I say it. I'm just never going to say it mean. And there's a few times that I've said that to our kids as well. Few last things. Never raise your voice to a child, and also never physically restrain them. If there's a child who, like one day in my ministry, crawled underneath the table and refused to come out. And so I moved that class to another classroom. I was not about to lay a hand on that child. I am not physically, and none of your sponsors or volunteers should ever physically pull a child, drag a child, pick up a child, hold a child to restrain him. And so at that point, I crawled under the table with him. Sat there, had a conversation. He would not. He was defiant with me, and so I simply informed him that I was going to go get his grandparents. And so at that point, I sent for his grandparents. I walked them into the room, explained to them what had happened. Actually, before we went in the room, I explained to them what had happened. Came in the room with them, explained to him the conversation that I had had with them, explained to him that he would be leaving our area with him, that he could not stay the rest of the day, and that he was welcome to come back in the future, that we loved him, we wanted him there, but coming back, part of the privilege of being in the class was obeying the rules. And at that point, I left the classroom, I shut the door, and that was between him and his grandparents at that point. And so, all this to say, be fair, be consistent, let God's love shine through you. Oh, and something I almost left out. There is a time that a child doesn't get a warning. If a child's offense is so high, so big, there's some that they need immediate action. They don't need a warning. And, for example, an obscene gesture, cussing, intentionally trying to harm another child, getting into a fist fight. This means immediately removing that child from those situations, and then you need to have a discussion with the parents. There are times where students will be sent to us, we'll have a conversation, they'll go back in class, and they'll do great. And at the end of the day, we tell them, you did a great job. You know, I knew you could do that well. We praise them for it, and we don't talk to the parents or call the parents. There's not a need to. But in situations where there's been cussing or fighting or obscene gestures, trying to harm someone else, things that are highly inappropriate, that's a whole different level. There's no warning that's needed there. Immediately they need to go to talk to the person in charge, and whatever the discipline procedure is at that point needs to kick in, and the parents need to be made aware of what's going on, because parents need to be involved in what's happening with their kids inside the classes and inside the ministry. It doesn't need to build up and then suddenly you come to the parents with a list. If something happens, talk to the parents, have open communication, and help them to understand also that what you're doing is because you love that child and you want what's best for them too. This has been a session on discipline.